Why do liars rise while honest people get left behind? Why do bullies become bosses while the kind-hearted stay stuck in the middle? You've seen it. Maybe in your workplace, maybe in history, or maybe even in your own family. The person who cuts corners, manipulates others, plays the game without shame. Somehow they win, they climb, they dominate. And the people who try to play fair, who lead with compassion or humility, they're overlooked, passed by, even crushed. It's not just frustrating, it's disorienting. Deep down, most of us want to believe that the world rewards goodness, that integrity, empathy, and hard work will pay off. But reality keeps confronting us with something colder, something darker. And the more we look away from that truth, the more powerless we feel. So, what's really going on? Friedrich Nietzsche, the famously unsettling German philosopher, spent his life grappling with this very dilemma. He didn't look away. He looked directly at the machinery of human nature, stripped of illusions, and asked the hard questions. What is power, really? Who gets it and why? Is morality just a story the weak tell themselves? And what would it take to rise without losing your soul? Nietzsche wasn't interested in comforting lies. He was interested in clarity, in what he called philosophizing with a hammer, breaking through the brittle idols of conventional morality to uncover deeper truths about strength, character, and human becoming. In this video, we're going to walk with Nietzsche into the heart of this moral confusion and try to find a way through. We'll explore 6 key insights that reveal why ruthless people often succeed and what we can learn from that pattern without surrendering to it. Along the way, we'll examine the hidden rules of power, the traps of victimhood, the myths we inherit about fairness, and Nietzsche's provocative vision of how to rise with integrity by becoming what he called the Übermensch. This won't be a comfortable journey, but if you've ever felt disillusioned by how the world works and you want to understand it deeply so you can act wisely, then stay with me. Let's begin. Let's start with a quiet observation, the kind that creeps in after a long day at work or after watching the news. The world doesn't always reward the kindest, most honest people. It often rewards those who appear confident, decisive, even ruthless, regardless of their inner character. You see this in politics. You see it in corporations. You see it in schoolyards. The person who plays by the rules may get praise, but the person who bends the rules, if they do it boldly, often gets promoted. This is one of those truths that everyone kind of knows, but no one wants to admit out loud, because it threatens something sacred, our belief that morality and success go hand in hand, that the good will rise and the wicked will fall, that if we just keep doing the right thing, things will work out. But Nietzsche wasn't interested in comforting beliefs. He was interested in truth, even if it hurts. He once wrote, "The noble soul has reverence for itself." That reverence, that dignity, that inner strength, it doesn't guarantee success, because power, as Nietzsche understood it, has its own laws. Here steps the uncomfortable truth. Power isn't set, moral or immoral. It's premoral. It's the raw force of life asserting itself. Will, ambition, energy, the drive to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. And in many systems, business, politics, even art, that force gets rewarded. Not because it's good, but because it gets results. That's why we see ruthless people rise. Not because the world loves evil, but because the world often admires effectiveness, confidence, and clarity of vision, even when they're unkind. And that creates a deep confusion because we're taught to associate good with being nice, humble, obedient. But those traits don't always help you win. In fact, they can become liabilities if they're not paired with strength. Nietzsche believed that traditional morality had become too sentimental, too reactive, more focused on avoiding harm than generating life. He saw this especially in the Christian values of his time: meekness, guilt, humility. To Nietzsche, these weren't universal virtues. They were the survival strategies of the powerless. Now, that's a controversial idea, and we'll unpack it more in the next section. But for now, here steps the key insight. Morality isn't always a guide to success, and power isn't always earned through virtue. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also strangely liberating. Because once we stop expecting the world to reward goodness automatically, we can start asking a deeper question: what kind of power do I want to cultivate? What kind of morality do I choose to live by? Not because it's rewarded, but because it's mine. Nietzsche doesn't set tell us to abandon all ethics, but he does ask us to become more conscious, to see power clearly, to stop pretending that the world runs on justice when it often runs on will. And once you see that clearly, you can start to play a different game. You can choose to be both strong and ethical, not because you expect a reward, but because that's who you are becoming. That's the challenge. And it begins by letting go of illusions, even comforting ones. Let's imagine a scene, not from our world, but from the ancient world. Two types of people walk the same earth. The first is the noble warrior, proud, confident, full of life. He sees himself as strong, capable, radiant. When he acts, he does so with a sense of natural authority. He doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't need validation. He simply is, and that's enough. The second is the oppressed servant, wounded, bitter, waiting. He lives under the warrior's shadow, resenting his power. He tells himself that the warrior is not noble, but evil, that humility is better than pride, that obedience is holier than strength, that the weak are truly good because they suffer. Nietzsche called these two perspectives master morality and slave morality. And once you see them, you start to notice them everywhere. Master morality begins from strength. It defines good as noble, life affirming, powerful. The good person is strong, creative, generous, proud, not out of arrogance, but out of fullness. They don't need to hate others to feel worthy. Slave morality, on the other hand, begins from weakness. It defines good as what protects the vulnerable: obedience, humility, patience, self sacrifice. It often reverses the values of the strong, turning power into evil and weakness into virtue. Nietzsche wasn't saying one is objectively right and the other wrong. What disturbed him was that slave morality, born from resentment, had become the dominant moral code in the modern world. He saw how centuries of oppression, especially under religious institutions, led the weak to redefine virtue in a way that served survival, not thriving. It was a moral revolution, but also a moral inversion. Strength was now evil, ambition was sinful, pride was the root of the fall. But here's the twist: Nietzsche didn't simply worship the strong, he wasn't cheering for tyrants. What he feared was when morality became a weapon for the powerless to shame and paralyze the strong. You might recognize this dynamic today. Think about how easily we demonize success, how quickly we frame ambition as selfishness, how suspicion and outrage now masquerade as moral virtue. That's not to say the strong are always good, far from it. But Nietzsche warns us when resentment shapes our morality, it becomes reactive, petty, and deeply dishonest. He called this resentment, a festering emotion where we mask our powerlessness by labeling power as evil. So, why does this matter? Because if you want to rise in the world and do so ethically, you have to be aware of which moral lens you're seeing through. Are you holding yourself back because deep down you believe power is wrong? Are you afraid to act boldly because you think it makes you selfish? Have you inherited a morality that punishes your own strength? These are hard questions, but they're also freeing. Because once you see the two moral systems, you can begin to choose. Nietzsche's invitation isn't to become a master or a slave, it's to rise beyond both, to create your own values, to act from strength, not domination, and not resentment. That's the path of the Übermensch, which we'll explore later. But first, we need to look at the world we live in now, a world where domination doesn't roar, it whispers, it hides. If this resonates, if you feel yourself waking up to truths you've always suspected, consider subscribing. We explore these kinds of ideas together every week, quietly, honestly, deeply. Now let's go one level deeper into the subtle ways modern society rewards domination in disguise. Picture a polished executive, sharp suit, warm smile, fluent in the language of empathy and inclusion. On the surface, they seem like the model of modern leadership, approachable, emotionally intelligent, collaborative. But behind the scenes, they manipulate outcomes, take credit for others' work, make strategic firings without blinking, and yet, somehow, they keep rising. Why? Because domination has learned to wear a mask. Nietzsche didn't live to see the corporate world or social media, but he would have understood it deeply. He saw, even in his own time, that raw power, the kind that ruled with open cruelty, was going out of fashion. But the drive for dominance, that didn't go anywhere. It just became more sophisticated. Today's world doesn't reward obvious aggression, it rewards covert power, the ability to control perception. We call it charisma, strategy, networking, sometimes even emotional intelligence. And don't get me wrong, those can be real virtues, but they can also become tools of subtle domination, especially when used without conscience. Here asks what Nietzsche would say. We live in a culture that outwardly praises humility, but quietly promotes confidence. We preach fairness, but reward results. We condemn selfishness, but admire those who get what they want. And many of the most successful people have simply learned to speak the moral language of the age while playing a much older game underneath. This creates a strange paradox. The very people who rise often appear virtuous, but not because they are, because they've mastered the performance of virtue. This does domination in disguise. This doesn't mean that everyone in power is fake or evil. Far from it. But it does mean we need to look more carefully at how power operates in the modern world. Because Nietzsche's insight was this: when society embraces slave morality as the dominant value system, when it outwardly praises weakness, humility, and suffering, The powerful don't disappear, they just get smarter. They learn to cloak their will to power in moral language. They speak on behalf of the oppressed, while consolidating their own influence. They present themselves as humble servants, while maneuvering behind the curtain. This is not a conspiracy, it's a survival strategy. People intuitively sense what their culture rewards, and they adapt. But what's dangerous is when we confuse appearance with essence, when we mistake smooth language for ethical character, when we assume that soft tones mean gentle hearts. Nietzsche forces us to ask, what if some of the most celebrated good people are simply the most socially intelligent will to power types? And what if many of the quietly noble are being crushed by a game they refuse to play? That's a hard question, but it's also an invitation to see more clearly, because clarity is the first step to integrity. When you understand the game, you're no longer manipulated by it. You don't have to imitate the ruthless, but you also don't that have to be naive. You can learn how power really moves without letting it corrupt you. You can develop strength and vision, not to dominate, but to create, to lead, to protect, to shape. That's the kind of power Nietzsche believed in. Not hidden domination, but naked becoming. But to claim that power, we have to let go of one of the most comforting illusions of all, the belief that life is fair, that good always wins. Because if you believe that myth too deeply, you'll end up heartbroken, or worse, bitter. And that brings us to the next insight, the just world fallacy and the pain of believing life is fair. Let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever looked at someone getting everything they want? Power, wealth, admiration, and felt that deep, aching sense of injustice? Not envy, something deeper, a sense that something wrong is being rewarded, while you, who tried to do things right, are still waiting for life to notice. That's not a childish feeling, that's human. We want the world to make sense. We want the good to win. We want to believe in a moral order, that behind all the chaos, there's a kind of justice, even if it moves slowly. But Nietzsche would tell us gently, perhaps, but firmly, that this belief is a fantasy, a story we tell ourselves to soften the blows of a chaotic world. Psychologists call it the just world fallacy, the belief that people get what they deserve, that good deeds are rewarded and bad ones are punished. It's comforting, it keeps us hopeful, but it also blinds us to how things actually work, because sometimes cruelty gets results, sometimes kindness gets ignored, and sometimes no one is watching. No one is keeping score. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He didn't believe the universe was moral. He didn't believe in karma or divine justice or any kind of cosmic fairness. He believed the world was raw, indifferent, full of chaos and creative force, and that if you waited for it to reward you simply for being good, you'd wait forever. That sep's a hard truth, especially if you have built your identity around being a good person. It can feel like betrayal, like the universe broke a promise. But here's where Nietzsche offers something unexpectedly empowering. He invites us to stop waiting, to stop bargaining with the world, to stop saying, I did everything right, so where's Sep's my reward? Instead, he asks, can you love life even when it seems unfair? Can you act from your deepest values, not because they'll be rewarded, but because they're yours? Nietzsche called this kind of strength amor fati, the love of fate, not passive acceptance, but fierce affirmation, a willingness to face reality as it is and still choose to create meaning, to act, to will. This is where most people give up, not because they're weak, but because they've been taught to believe that goodness should be enough. When it isn't, they feel cheated, they become bitter, or they withdraw. Or worse, they start imitating the very ruthlessness they once despised. But there's another way. You can grieve the loss of that comforting story, the myth of the just world, and then step into something deeper, a clarity that doesn't wait for fairness, but creates values through action. This doesn't mean you stop caring about justice. It means you stop expecting it to be automatic. It means you rise with your eyes open because the world isn't that fair, but it is real. And in that reality, you still have power, not over everything, but over yourself, over your choices, over your response, over what you create from what life hands you. That steps where Nietzsche turns next, to what happens when the sensitive, the thoughtful, the good hearted give up their will, because the world isn't just shaped by the ruthless, it's shaped by the absence of those who could have made a difference but didn't. Yusef probably heard the phrase, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. It sounds noble, but Nietzsche would push it further. He would ask, why do good people so often do nothing? Why do the thoughtful, the kind, the self aware so often retreat from action, from ambition, from power? And what happens to the world when they do? Nietzsche believed that the greatest tragedy of human history isn't set the rise of the wicked, it sets the withdrawal of the worthy. Because when the sensitive give up their will, the insensitive take their place. When the self doubting step back, the self serving step forward. When those with conscience hesitate, those without it move fast. And the world gets shaped, not by the most ethical, but by the most willing. But this isn't just about the world, it's personal. Think of all the moments in your life when you held back, not out of laziness, but out of overthinking, out of fear of being seen as arrogant, out of guilt for wanting more, out of the quiet shame that maybe power in any form makes you a bad person. Nietzsche saw this pattern, not just in society, but in the soul. He saw how traditional morality had taught people to distrust their own will, to be suspicious of ambition, to shrink themselves in the name of humility. But when you suppress your will long enough, something dangerous happens. You don't sit, just become passive. You become bitter. You begin to resent those who act. You start to believe that striving is selfish, that power itself is dirty. And eventually, you begin to see yourself as a victim of the world, rather than a creator within it. Nietzsche called this the denial of life. He saw it as a kind of spiritual illness, where the life force within a person turns inward and festers because it has nowhere to go. But here Seps what he also believed, and it Seps where the hope lives. You can reclaim your will, not in the shallow hustle culture sense of grind harder, but in the deeper, spiritual sense of choosing to act, to shape, to become. You don't have to be ruthless to be powerful. You don't have to dominate others to take up space, but you do have to stop apologizing for existing. Nietzsche challenges us to ask, what would it mean to stop hiding behind humility? What would it feel like to own your strength without shame, without fear, without resentment? Who could you become if you stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing yourself? This isn't set about ego. It's sets about responsibility to your gifts, to your potential, to the difference you could make if you stepped forward Because here is the deeper risk. If you don't claim your space in the world, someone else will, and they might not use it as wisely or as humanely as you would have. So, no, Nietzsche doesn't want good people to become tyrants. He wants them to stop disappearing, to stop deferring, to stop waiting for permission, to stop shrinking, to make others comfortable. Because the world doesn't just need strong people, it needs strong souls. People who can rise with their conscience intact. Which leads us to the final insight in this journey, and Nietzsche sips most daring vision, how to rise ethically, not by becoming less human, but by becoming something more. We've talked a lot about power, about morality, about what happens when the ruthless rise and the good retreat, but Nietzsche didn't leave us in despair. He didn't just tear down old values. He offered a vision, a new kind of human, a becoming, a challenge. He called it the Übermensch, often translated as overman or superman, but those words miss the mark. This isn't about being above others, it's about going beyond your former self. The Übermensch isn't stay a tyrant. He sets not a villain. He sets not a cartoon of dominance. He's the one who creates meaning in a world without guarantees. The one who rises not by following inherited rules, but by forging his own values. The one who looks at a world without inherent fairness and chooses to act anyway. You see, when Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't celebrating, he was diagnosing. He saw that the old moral order, the belief in objective external meaning, was fading, and in its absence, people would either fall into nihilism or rise into something greater. That sets the task of the Übermensch, not to conquer the world, but to conquer themselves, to become a source of strength, meaning, and creativity in a chaotic world. It steps not easy, because it means standing alone. It means refusing both blind conformity and blind rebellion. It means carrying the weight of your own existence, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Imagine a person who no longer waits for approval, who doesn't sit disguise their will, who lives with depth, with style, with courage, not because they expect to be rewarded, but because it's who they are becoming. That sets the ethical challenge Nietzsche gives us to rise, but not through domination, through transformation. And here sits what that means in practical terms. Instead of copying others, create. Don't just imitate what's worked for the ruthless. Ask yourself, what am I here to build? Instead of resenting the powerful, become powerful differently. Don't shame others for their ambition. Channel your own with clarity and conscience. Instead of waiting for fairness, embody justice. Be the presence you wish the world had more of, not passively, but with active will. This is not a quick fix. It sets a lifelong path, a slow, deep becoming. It means facing your shadow, your fear, your envy, your resentment, and integrating it, not denying it. It means learning to say yes to life, even the painful parts. It means acting not because it's safe, but because it's true. Nietzsche called this process a kind of self overcoming, not self improvement that steps too small. Self overcoming is a full transformation of your relationship with life itself. And here steps the paradox. When you rise this way, ethically, consciously, from within, you become untouchable in the best sense. Not because you dominate others, but because you're no longer ruled by fear or by the need to be seen as good. You become someone who doesn't just play the game, you transcend it. You live with such depth and force that your presence changes the people around you, not through power over, but through power through. That's Sips, the kind of rising Nietzsche believed in, and that's the kind of strength the world desperately needs. Not louder voices, not sharper elbows, but deeper souls. So now the question becomes, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting to be good and started becoming great on your own terms? So, why do ruthless people so often succeed? Now we can see it's not because they're evil, but because the world often rewards will, not virtue. Because domination, when disguised well enough, is mistaken for leadership. Because those who hesitate, even out of goodness, are easily replaced by those who don't. We Svi walked through 6 core insights, each peeling back a layer of illusion. That power and morality are not the same, and often move in opposite directions. That morality itself has a history, split between the proud strength of master morality and the reactive self denial of slave morality. That modern society cloaks domination in moral language, and we often don't sit notice that the belief in a fair world, while comforting, can lead to deep disillusionment. That when the good give up their will, the world is left to the will of the ruthless, and that Nietzsche sits ideal, the Übermensch, invites us not to copy the ruthless, but to transcend the entire game. This journey began with confusion. Why do bad people win? But it ends with a deeper challenge. What would it mean to become powerful without losing your soul? Because Nietzsche isn't asking you to be heartless. He's asking you to stop hiding behind a moral system that keeps you small. He's asking you to become conscious of your values, your strength, your direction, to see life as it really is, raw, unfair, beautiful, and still rise, not by dominating others, but by becoming yourself, fully, fiercely, ethically. That sips the work. It stunts not for the faint of heart. It means walking away from the comfort of victimhood. It means saying no to resentment. It means creating meaning in a world that doesn't hand it to you. But the reward is real, not a trophy, not applause, something quieter, but deeper clarity, strength, a life lived awake. So if this conversation stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Take a moment to reflect. Where have you been holding back your will? Where have you mistaken goodness for weakness? What values are truly yours, not inherited, not rewarded, but chosen? And if you'd like to keep walking this path with us, subscribe, leave a comment, share your thoughts. This channel isn't about quick answers, it's about asking better questions together, because philosophy isn't set just a subject, it steps a way of life. And sometimes the deepest strength begins not with power over the world, but with power over yourself.